So most of cost management is really process driven. So it's all about, how you can make your production most efficient, how you can save fabric. I wanted to today take a different approach because I assumed that my colleagues here would be doing that part of the job. So I thought I would look at it a little bit differently and not take a process approach. Look at it in terms of what should we spend on the various activities that we do. Now, most of us, when we are, doing our orders or whatever it may be, we do a costing, right? So we come up with certain assumptions of what something is going to cost us, our raw materials and our labor, our overhead, et cetera, and for the most part, I think most of us do a fairly good job with assuming a certain cost for our raw materials and then purchasing the raw materials within that cost. So I'm not going to focus on how we can save money on raw materials. I think we must all be doing fairly well. I think the focus for most of us in the manufacturing business is how do we control the labor, how do we control the overhead, or how do we spend what we think we should spend. So the first question, really to ask ourselves is, when we make our cost sheet, are we doing it right? Are we doing it the proper way? Are we allocating the costs in our cost sheet the way that actually what we are going to spend? Because cost overrun means that you assume something was going to cost A, but actually you spend B. Now you may have spent B because you weren't very good at it, or you may have spent B because you messed up assuming it was A. So really the first thing that everybody has to do is your methodology for costing correct? And I want to go back to the previous slide. You can go back to the previous slide for a second. You'll notice that in this slide, the markup at 10% is 41, which is 10% of 411. I have seen many ERP softwares in this country, and most of them cost incorrectly. In that, when you put a markup percentage in, they take the percentage on the cost. So in most ERP programs that you buy here, you will see a 10% markup at 37.0 and not at 41. And when we look at financial statements, we look at percentages to sale. So right away you're 1% off. If at the end of the year you're looking at what did I make and you made 9%, well, you made 9% because you costed 9%, because you took it on cost and you didn't take it on sale. Right? So the formula is not 10% of your cost. The formula is you divide by 90% of your cost to get 10% of your sale. And most, like I said, ERP packages do it wrong. So let's go back. So the first question really is, do we cost properly? And now we can cost, in the earlier example, I just put a lump sum of labor and a lump sum for overhead. But the more detailed we can make our cost sheet, the better it helps us in controlling our cost. Because what is our cost sheet? Our cost sheet really is our revenue. This is what we are assuming, is the money that's coming into us, and then we're spending against that. We're spending against that for fabric we're purchasing. We're spending against that for the sewing cost, finishing cost, blah blah blah. So the more detailed you can make your cost sheet, the more systemized, the more methodical, the better it is for you when you have all those heads of revenue. You can then match those heads of revenue to your heads of cost. So you can see I took the same 170 rupees that we had assumed before, and this time I kind of itemized it. So, what are we going to spend for cutting? What are we going to spend for, tailoring? What are we going to spend for production other than tailoring? Blah, 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 blah. You have all the different areas that consume your money. And then at the end, of course, there's, that black box of other overheads, which I don't know how many people really count for that in their cost sheets. You have your sampling, you have your security, you have your personnel people, you have your cleaning people, you have a whole host of employees running around in your factories. Where are they in your cost sheet? Did anybody think of maybe putting that cost in and accounting for it in a proper method, systemized manner? So once we have our cost sheets and we know what we're making for a given order, what we like to do is we sort of take all these cost sheets and we sum them. So we say for you can go to the next sheet. So we say for a given period. Now it can be a month, it can be a season, it can be a buyer season, it can be a buyer month. So we'll say, for this particular factory floor, this buyer for this quarter, the sum of all the cost sheets if we take a geometric average, and by geometric average, I mean, if you have a cost sheet giving you 50 rupees per piece on the tailoring cost, and it's only 5,000 pieces, but another cost sheet you assume 60 pieces, or 60 rupees for the tailoring cost, but it's 100,000 pieces, obviously your average is not 50 plus 60 divided by 2, your average is the 100,000 into 60 plus the 50 into the 10,000, and what is really the geometric mean of all of the costs. So we take geometric means for a given area, and we come up with a budget. So we arrive at a budget. So for this floor, we could say, okay, we're going to make 50,000 pieces, and these are the costs that we assumed. Now we have an idea of what are the revenues we assumed. So we assumed for cutting an X number, for sewing, for production, for washing, for finishing, blah, 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 blah. And this gives us a starting point as to how we should be setting up our factory. Now, again, I'm not looking at production efficiencies. I'm not talking about wastages. I'm simply saying we took orders, we've made assumptions for taking those orders, and we should make sure that what we spend is based on our assumption, because the minute we go beyond that assumption, we're taking money from our pocket. We're taking money from our margin, or from our drawback, or from the focus license, or whatever other source of revenue that we have that we would like to obviously keep. So the key is, when you take a cost sheet, you have the assumptions in that cost sheet, you want to make sure you spend inside that cost sheet for whatever activity it is that you're doing in your factory. So now we have created a budget for all of these activities, and then what we do then is, if we go to the next sheet, we then look at the budget that we have from our cost sheet, which is the budgeted amount, and then we go to the actual heads and we see what are we going to spend if we do nothing today. So we have X people in finishing, we have X people in cutting, we have X people in all of these areas, and if we work them for 10 hours a day for 6 days a week, or whatever it is that we're going to run the factory this month or this season, we're going to spend Y. But our cost sheet is only giving us X. So now you already know, are you going to save some money in your production area, or are you going to lose some money in your production area this month? You already know before you spent it. So before all the inefficiencies took place, if you're looking at the money you lost after the fact, it's too late. You need to be looking at the money before you spend it. What am I getting? What am I spending? What's the difference? And what do I need to do about it? Maybe you need to go to the floor manager and say, listen, your finishing budget this month is only 7 lakhs. I don't care how you do it. You get it done, because that's what we costed. And then you need to get into all the methodologies of, no WIP, and I'm going to finish what I produce and all that other stuff. But first is to have a target. What are we going to spend? We're going to spend what we assumed, the revenue that we're going to get. So this is, how we come up with that methodology of what everybody should be getting, what we should be spending. And then what we do is we go to the final page and we say, okay, this is what our geometric mean is, and then we look at it every single day. So every single day we say, what did it cost us today to sew on this floor, to cut on this floor, to wash on this floor, to pack on this floor? What was the cost of sampling for this floor? What was the cost of energy for this floor? We look at that every single day. And then we look at the average of that month every single day. And every single day it goes off, someone gets a phone call, or someone gets asked, listen, this is off. Why are we off? What do we need to do? And this is how we sort of, start the ball rolling. And then we go into all of the other stuff about, reconciling the fabrics and, low WIP and how do you control production processes and, how do you control absenteeism, and that's, a whole different conversation. But the beginning of the conversation is, are you matching your expenses with your revenues? Are you planning for it? Or are you giving money from the profit that you thought you were going to make? And the sooner you start that conversation with yourself, the better it is for you. And that's about it.
Thank you. Thank you. I like the fact when you said 10% of the sales, not 10% of the cost. That is a very important aspect. Most of us do that mistake of taking on the cost as a base for our profitability. Any questions for?
The old adage is that if you can't measure it, you can't control it. You hit on the nail's head saying that while going into the costing, we need to dip into the empirical data. But how many companies, religiously speaking, in the apparel industry are religiously following this?
I can't say that. I have no idea how many companies are following, but if you don't start adopting these sort of methodologies, I think you're not going to be in business for very long. The environment today is highly competitive, and we have no choice but to improve ourselves. As he said, they thought they were great and they found they could be better. And they're a great benchmark. Orient Fashion is always known to be one of the best companies in our industry. So certainly if they can improve themselves on a regular basis, we can all improve ourselves on a regular basis. But the important thing is that the data has to be collected. And that's not easy to do. And what we found was when we were in the market looking for ERP software, I didn't like anything. I'm an Apple user. I've been an Apple user for 25 years, and most of the ERP programs here are Windows-based. So we decided to build our own. So we actually built our own ERP and came up with our own methodologies, our own reporting systems, and which is nice because then I can walk into the factory one day and say, I want to see this data in this manner, in this presentation, and I can have it within 24 hours. And that's a big plus. But it's very important to measure data constantly.
So how do you calculate overheads as a fixed on quantity? Do you fix it per month on any sort of garment, or do you change it garment to garment based on the SAM value of the garment?
When you say overheads, what exactly do you mean by that?
You mean I mean the material which is the cost component, which is not like material or
direct
SAM, like the labor or the input cost. So it's basically all your other expenses that, like you said, the people running around in your factory.
So we, in our cost sheet, what we have done is that we have a head for that. So we have a head for our direct tailoring costs, our direct finishing costs, and we have a head for indirect production costs, which are all these additional people. And then we have a head for revenue. I think quite often what people do is they do a cost sheet and they think they're making 15%, but they're not really making 15%. When our cost sheet, if we can make 2% or 3%, we know we're making 2% or 3%. Because we try to include everything that we know it's going to cost us. And then like I said, once I have the next season's cost sheets, I can go back to a division and say, this is what we costed our overhead to be. How are we going to fit all of those non-direct costs into this number? And quite often it doesn't fit. But then at least you're clear. You know already before the fact that you're off by this many lakhs because you have to have that sampling department running, or you have to have that thing running.
A fixed number as overhead?
No, we actually do it as a proportion of the output. So we say that if an output of a style is low, the overhead is higher. If the output is high, the overhead is lower.
Right. That's what happens.
On what basis we are measuring and assuming how many workforce we need to manage our productivity for upcoming months? What is the right parameter to set up the budget for workforce?
Well,
is this based on SAM value of the product, or we are assuming we need such number of employees to finish product within a month? Since we are setting a budget for a month, which includes starting, finishing, so being a garment trade, we need to see the process first. In finishing, there are so many processes we have to see what kind of the labor we require to finish a product. So how we are calibrating? Is there any parameter are we doing on the SAM value, or we are just assuming the kind of workforce we require to complete our job?
Are you asking when we cost a garment or when we actually go to set the workforce for manufacturing the garment?
I'm talking about to set a workforce for garment.
The real way to do it is to do it on some sort of SAM value, is to see what is the required time that a particular operation requires, and then see how many people you want to spread that operation over. But like I said, doing a process-based analysis is different than doing just budgeting. And what I was talking about today was budgeting. How do you come up with a framework? And once you have the framework, then you can go back into the process and see, does my process and my framework match? So it depends on the style. Your question, how many finishing people should I employ? I don't know. It depends on your style. It depends on the complexity of that garment, and it's how you manufacture it. You manufacture it in batches. You do it in a lean process. Going into the process is much more complicated. But yes, it should be done on some sort of SAM value.
I just add to that what Mark has said. Basically, we already have 2 to 3 months of booking in hand upfront. So it's relatively, whenever we have that booking, we actually plan. So when we plan and when we have SMBs, right, we are calculating that. It's relatively easy to, map how much manpower do we need. So I think that's how we budget.